All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Me here talking about real music in real time. Of course, for real people just like you and just like me. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thanks for hanging in here. Um, there are some things happening, and I just appreciate the folks who are over on Patreon or just regular viewers. Like I say, if you just put the video on repeat play, it'll rack up some views. That's a good way to do it. So, in any event, yesterday, Neal Schon had a birthday. Happy birthday to Neal Schon, who turns 67. His new album, Universe, is out there. And I've noticed Neal's been promoting it quite a bit on his Twitter feed and in a few other places. It's more about Universe than the new Journey material. Now, what was interesting is during the birthday wishes, there is a video, and it goes on for, I think, about 15 minutes. People like Joe Bonamassa and Sammy Hagar, and obviously his current band, which includes Narada Michael Walden. During the Narada portion of the tribute, I heard some interesting music in the background. I heard some interesting guitar playing, and it sounded a bit progressive, and I'm wondering if that might have been a sample from the new Journey album, or it might be something else that I just never really paid attention to in the past. In any event, it was a very interesting tribute video. Jonathan Cain actually composed a song for Neal Schon. Okay, and it shows you the difference a few years can make. And these guys have battled to save this band on multiple occasions. Just think of this, okay? And by the way, Steve Perry did not weigh in with any birthday wishes for Neal Schon. I don't know. I'm thinking Perry's 72. Neal is 67. Time is going by. Everybody's getting older. 2020 kind of sucked, right? 2021 has only been a continuation, mostly. The recording industry, especially the live music industry, is still a big question mark. So you think maybe these guys might start to see eye to eye. And look, Cain and Schon have rolled out that welcome mat, that red carpet. And Perry, the best thing the only thing I can really get out of what Perry says back is, yeah, they just want to work with me. They don't really like me, even though that's not really true. I mean, Neal Schon said that he would go out and have a cup of coffee and still waiting for that coffee. And then, the speculation, here's the thing. If Perry did say happy birthday to Neal Schon, then people would say, aha, maybe there's something there. I mean, Arnel goes out there and says, hey, I'd rather see Steve Perry in this band than me. And that fires up the speculation machine. But what's really interesting, though, is what Schon and Cain have been through when you look at it. So Cain replaces Greg Raleigh. Greg Raleigh and Neal Schon had a tight bond, and I'm sure Neal wasn't overly thrilled that his friend and band co-founder was deciding he didn't want to do this anymore. Now, it's back and forth. I've read things that, he didn't sing all that much anymore. He liked, giving over some of those duties to Steve Perry, but I think Neal Schon and Greg Raleigh, they had their own vision for the band, and when Perry came in, that vision was shattered. And Raleigh, who was trying to conform more, if you listen to the two albums, especially the one right before Infinity, you notice that Raleigh is trying to croon a little bit. He's trying to sing. The songs have, again, Infinity, if you listen to that album and then you listen to Look Into the Future, you can kind of see that the band was kind of pointed in that direction, but they needed Steve Perry in there to give the whole thing a kickstart and to really make this arena rock. Greg Raleigh does not have an arena rock vocal. Okay, he doesn't. He has great vocals, but Greg is more for like maybe rolling up one of those cigarettes. Not that I would do that, right? But I'm just saying that's the kind of thing, especially if you go back, listen to his work in Santana. He has a great sound. It's just not, that's why when you had Perry and Raleigh on one song, for music fans, that was like the ultimate, because the voices blended and contrasted in a way that just made each singer better. When you heard their voice, you were like, ooh. And then you went from one voice to another, and this is, AOR heaven, whatever you want to call it. It was just really great stuff. But getting back to the whole saving the band thing. So, Raleigh leaves, and then Kane comes in, and the thing takes off like a rocket because Kane can write the way that maybe Steve Perry likes to write songs. And they mesh, and then Neal is there to kind of put like the finishing touches on everything, or to inject maybe an idea that's a little more progressive or a little bit more gritty. Because I think Neal Schon was afraid that his band was going to get too wimpy. And some of his fears were were founded, were definitely correct in, like, if you listen to Open Arms and Still They Ride and Faithfully, you're thinking, okay, this ain't the band that brought us Where Were You and, Any Way You Want It. Things are starting to shift here a little bit. And Neal wasn't too on board with it, although he did like having all these new female fans in the audience. He talked about that a lot. I think in the documentary, the famous Behind the Music. But then you got to look at what happens later. Those two albums, Frontiers and Escape. Escape now, 40th anniversary. For Journey fans, this is, a masterwork. This is the summer coming up where I went to see Journey 40 years ago. It's just stupid. Not that I went, that it's 40 years ago. It's just really stupid. But what a show. Just Journey at their high octane peak. Everybody just delivering 110%. Neal Schon still doing what he does. And there was respect going back and forth. But then things unraveled. And Steve Perry has a story to tell, but I think Jonathan Cain and Neal Schon, they have stories that they should tell as well as to what was going on. They don't say much about all of that stuff. And I've been told through a fairly reliable source that there's enough material for a book. Now, Cain wrote his book, right? He wrote his book, Don't Stop Believing, really powerful, positive book. At times took a little more credit for things than maybe he deserved. But overall, I think he was trying to say, hey, this is my life. There was this big fire when I was a kid. I found faith in God. My dad told me not to stop believing. I'm sure that's a true story because Neal used to tell that story a long time ago. And he had that written down, and then it evolved into this monstrosity of a 1 billion streamed song, which I talked about the other day. So as time goes on, Perry, who, again, he's not going to be saying happy birthday because he thinks that if I do that, then speculation will grow and then people will want me back in Journey. And I think that ship has sailed. I know there are always going to be fans that say, hey, it could still happen. My hope is that maybe someday Perry would get up there and sing a couple of songs with those guys. I mean, I think that would be enough. And people would go crazy. And Steve's stock would go up. Interest in Journey would go up. Arnel, I know, under more pressure and so forth, but Arnel's been there for a while, and Steve always says that Arnel sings his heart out every night, which is different from, boy, is Arnel a great singer. I'm just saying. I'm not saying that he's being intentional in that, but it is interesting. So, Perry leaves in 87, walks away from it. Those guys are left holding the bag. They, I think, keep to Steve's wishes. They go off and they do Bad English, right? Which was a pretty big deal for a couple of years. When I See You Smile is a number one song, something that Journey never had. So, kind of a mild success. Um, the guys eventually didn't like each other in that group. There was lots of tension and friction. The 90s were coming. They had a second album, which wasn't overly promoted because the band was already beginning to disintegrate. But then what was next? You know, the guys started to hang around with Kevin Chalfant. He's the guy who sang for The Storm, also was in a group called 707. Kevin could sing. He had this great sound. If you listen to his work in The Storm or in 707, you're going to think, yeah, this guy makes sense. Well, just as things were starting to develop there, Perry says, I want back in. And he gets back in. And then you know the story. He couldn't do the tour because of his hip. And the guys waited a couple of years. And Trial by Fire, which actually got Grammy nominated, which was, I think, a first for Journey, just was allowed to sort of fade away. In the old days, it was album, tour. You had to do a tour after the album. That was just what you did. Nowadays, it's just touring. There's no albums. And if you do an album, you know, the old bands are like, well, if we're going to put this out, I want to make sure that we can, you know, tour this year, and everything is still locked down. So one of the reasons I don't think the Journey material is out is because they're looking for a time to actually release it where they can get confirmation that maybe they'll have a few concert dates. So as the legend has it, and has truth tells it, really, it's a truthful story. Perry in 1998 and Journey part ways. I think Perry says May of 98, and that was it. Done. And it was, again, Kane and Schon who said, we are willing to make the worst contract and give Steve Perry a boatload of revenue for literally decades to come. The touring revenue, I believe even like, you know, the merchandise that they sell and so forth, that Perry's going to get a cut. And Perry isn't doing anything for the band. He's just taking the cut and being bought out of his contract and his responsibilities. And Perry made off really well with that. And Kane and Schon had to pick up the pieces and get Steve Augeri in the band. And then Steve's voice gives out because the catalog is ridiculous. It's hard to sing. And Steve Augeri was working at the Gap, you know, and wasn't singing on a regular basis. And he goes from that to, hey, I'm the lead singer of Journey now. And then Jeff Scott Soto for 11 months roams the stage, thought he had the gig. Probably the strongest physical man and singer the band has ever had. Seriously, I know people think that's controversial. Listen to Jeff Scott Soto even today sing. Muscular, tough, rugged vocals. Could be the kind of softer, subtle kind of Steve Perry balladeer when he needed to be. But man, if you want gas in the tank on stage, you want a guy with a great stage presence and a great presentation, Soto, top of the list up here. And then, of course, Arnel, and the band gets saved again. And Neal Schon deserves credit for that. You know, he decided to go in a completely different direction for some reason. And the whole Philippines bringing him here, that whole story, really amazing. And that's been what, like 13, 14 years ago now? That's crazy. When Neal Schon was like 54. And I think he did an interview with CBS at the time where he said something like, you know, the interviewer asks him, so haven't you had enough of this? And he's like, no, man, I never get enough. Just getting started, you know? That's the difference between Neal Schon And Jonathan Cain is a worker bee. He's got his worship thing. He does worship every week at his church. I know people don't like his wife. They don't like his church. They don't like him. They don't like his religious beliefs and all that stuff. The dude works just on a schedule. It's like Jonathan Cain's doing a concert, I think, at least once a week. Basically, it's basically a concert, and maybe you won't hear Journey songs on the Sunday morning worship portion of the program, but just, hey, that's Jonathan Cain, and he's up there singing. Now people will say, well, John's not the best singer and blah, 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 but so what? It's kind of like you see one of your icons, hey, that guy's in Journey, that's pretty cool. And I think Neal Schon made peace with all of the politics and all the things that maybe were getting under his skin because he wanted to save his band again. And the recent stuff that happened last year with Steve Smith and Ross Valerie brought those guys together even more, where they're like, okay, we need to save the band. And Neal Schon instantly again sprung into action. Narada Michael Walden. Who's going to argue with Narada Michael Walden on drums? Dean Castronovo said, hey, I remember. Well, I don't know, might have been in private conversation. I'm sure he wouldn't care if I shared this, but he said, hey, Narada Michael Walden, duh. Like he's saying that's a good choice. And nobody's going to argue with Randy Jackson on bass either. I mean, is Steve Perry going to argue with Randy Jackson on bass? No. So these guys have formed this bond because they've always had to work hard to keep the show alive. Whether fans were gung-ho about this new singer from the Philippines, and he still gets a bunch of crap all the time. It's impossible to fill those shoes. So people should cut him slack rather than, getting on social media and blasting him and saying, you're not the real thing. Duh. He knows he's not the real thing, but he's a great thing nonetheless. He's the real Arnel thing. He's a new thing. He's a different thing. And then people who are like, Neal Schon, he's always out there noodling. He's always playing guitar. He's too busy. He needs to settle down. That's not him. That's not his thing. He just wants to keep moving forward. I mean, if it weren't for this lockdown baloney, I think Neal Schon would have played like 100 gigs last year at least. And I think he wants to do it this year. And Jonathan Cain, if you listen to that little tribute that John Cain did, it sounds like these guys have just put everything aside and decided, hey, you know what? This is bigger. Journey is bigger than just you and I. And they acknowledge it. Steve Perry, who's out there, could come home at any time. Arnel says, hey, I'll just step aside, even if it were just for a moment. But you got to have relationships, and like Neal Schon is friends with Sammy Hagar. Neal Schon is friends with Joe Bonamassa. Neal Schon is friends with a number of really high profile musicians who are out there. Steve Lukather, right? Most of them are guitar players, but pretty much, like Hagar and Schon work together. HSAS, if you remember that band. So it's kind of depressing if you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe there's hope. Maybe Perry will, throw an olive branch out there. It's weird because they'll all wish Steve Perry happy birthday. But it's not reciprocated. It's just as if that relationship never existed, which is kind of sad. In any event, went really long on this video, but I've been looking at this stuff for a long time. And as a fan of Steve Perry and as a fan of Journey, I just wish they would do it for the fans. Do it for the brand for one time. I mean, I get that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that event was a real brand booster. But imagine if you did something musically together. Just one song even. Perry's got tons of songs written. Imagine, I heard on that Perry album from 2 or 3 years ago, so many people said to me, imagine if Neal played the solo here. And I was like, yep, imagine if he did. Imagine if Jonathan Cain had a really cool keyboard part to introduce this song. Yeah, I mean, they're great musicians. That's one thing that Perry should understand. I know he likes to work with some really good players, but Cain and Schon are right up there. And it would make a lot of people happy, but I get it. I get it. It's a divorce. And the divorce just is irreconcilable differences. So that's my video, super long video on the topic. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications for new videos. And you can join me on Patreon for just $1 a month. There's a little Patreon logo on the banner of this channel. And again, thanks for keeping me afloat here.